I made the mistake of looking into the serial killers operating on America's highways, and oh boy, did this little side quest unearth the granddaddy of all rabbit holes. It's a terrifying reality to swallow. Here's some statistics to make your hair curl. There are 850 victims that have been found next to the major highways since the 1980s that the FBI believe are linked to serial killings specifically. Some say that since that time, there have been no less than 50 individual serial killers operating on America's spiderweb system of highways. Others say that number is closer to 200. There are roughly 90 to 100 distinct clusters thought to stem from isolated individual killers that have been identified. And even worse than that, these stats only stem from the 1980s to the current day. The FBI knows for certain that it's been going on since the 40s, but their data collections have only reached the 80s so far. So there are 40 years that are yet to be documented and studied. So whatever statistics are on the book already, we can safely double those, probably more, since there was an era between the 50s and the 80s where serial killings were at an all-time high. It's been creatively called the golden age of serial killers. So we might well be talking about thousands of victims and hundreds of killers, and only a fraction of them have been caught. So this got me thinking, why don't we do a little series on the subject? Every couple of videos, we highlight 2 highway murder clusters in between our regular cases. This week, we'll do 3 unsolved killers, and next week, we'll highlight 2 highway killers that were solved, until we've covered all the ones that we currently know about. How does that sound? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let's get cracking on our first case. On the 30th of April 1971, just outside Prince George's County in Washington, D.C., a truck driver got out of his cab to stretch his legs on the I-295 highway. There, he found the body of a young black woman, possibly a teenager, lying in the bushes. She was fully clothed, except for her lack of shoes, and for the next couple of days, police searched the area for evidence. They found nothing. She's never been identified, but this Jane Doe would be the start of a 1.5-year-long time of terror for Washington, D.C. 2 days later, another girl was found dead, Carol Denise Finks, just 13 years old, missing for a week after being sent to the store by her mother. Little Denise had been held captive for at least 5 days. She'd been assaulted, strangled, and there were green fibers on her body. She didn't have any shoes on either. 2 months later, another teenager shows up along the same highway. On July the 8th, the abduction of 16-year-old Darlenia Denise Johnson was reported. 4 days after her disappearance, an anonymous caller dialed police. He actually gave them the location of the body and left details that only the killer would have known. 11 days after her disappearance, and 7 days after receiving the call, a passerby found Darlenia just 15 feet away from where little Denise was found. Yep, the cops never even bothered to follow up on that call. That was almost certainly made by the killer. Witnesses saw Darlenia inside an old black car driven by an African-American male, so she'd been kept alive for a few days too. Unfortunately, the heat made it impossible to tell if Darlenia had been assaulted, though the hyoid bone in her neck was broken, so strangulation was ruled as the cause of death. And yes, Darlenia was dressed except for her shoes. That same month, on July the 27th, 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett went missing after being sent to the store by her parents. 2 hours later, while police and family were out searching, Brenda's 7-year-old sister received a call on their home phone. Brenda was on the other end crying. Brenda told her sister that she'd been picked up by a white man, that she thought that she was somewhere in Virginia, and that she was heading home in a cab soon. Half an hour later, Brenda called again. This time her stepfather answered. She repeated what she told her little sister. Brenda added a strange question. She asked if her mother had seen her, and then, with heavy footsteps heard in the background, she said, "I'll see you," and the line went dead. Police believe that Brenda was given information to relay over to her family, and that her statement that she was in Virginia and that the man who'd taken her was white was a red herring, meant to mislead police. But her question about whether or not her mother had seen her seemed to go off script because the kidnapper cut the call short almost instantly. It's possible that Brenda was trying to say that she was close by or that the man who'd taken her was known to them. Late afternoon the next day, a hitchhiker found the clothed, shoeless body of Brenda a mile northeast of I-295's nearest entrance. She'd been assaulted, redressed, strangled, and a scarf was tied around her neck. Her feet were clean, so she might have been bathed before being killed, and there were numerous green fibers on her body and clothes. Now, with 4 shoeless corpses, each younger than the next, you'd think that the papers would be blaring the headline that there was a child killer on the loose in D.C. But there was barely a peep. This, coupled with the police's lackluster investigations, understandably had the African-American community in an uproar. Black kids were dying, but they weren't given the attention they deserved simply because of the color of their skin. And I hate to say it, they were right, damn it. Had this happened in a cushy neighborhood with white picket fences, the victims' faces would have been plastered on every billboard. Curfews would be put in place. Neighborhood watches and press releases would be all over the place. Yet Denise, Brenda, Darlenia, and the unidentified victim were only showcased in passing segments. They did put in more effort into Brenda's search, and I hate to argue with police on anything in this case, but I think they were right to suspect that the perpetrator had fed Brenda a script. Had he been white, he'd have stood out like a sore thumb in any of the neighborhoods where the girls disappeared from. No way would a witness not notice him. But his affinity for that stretch of highway was telling. There were 1,000 other places for him to dispose of the bodies, yet this highway was his dumping ground of choice, so he had reason to frequent it. If not a truck driver, then possibly a sales or delivery man who came to D.C. on schedule. Before they could answer those questions, Nenomoshia Yates was sent to the store at 7 o'clock the evening of Sunday the 1st of October. She was seen getting into a blue Volkswagen and vanished off the face of the earth. 3 hours later, Nino, as her family called her, was found shoeless, strangled, and assaulted less than a mile from the I-295. She too had green fibers on her clothes. Her body was still warm when she was found, and there was a decent semen sample taken from her remains, as well as a single male hair. Police have never disclosed what race the hair indicated the perpetrator was. Her case would finally reach the papers, dubbing the killer with the moniker the Freeway Phantom, forcing police to confirm that there was a serial killer out there hunting children. Next came Brenda Denise Woodard, 18 years old and coming home at 10:30 after having dinner with friends on the 15th of November. Brenda was found the next morning, fully clothed, her shoes still on, several stab wounds bearing the reason for her death, signs of sexual assault, and laid down only a half a mile from the highway's nearest entrance. Brenda's neck showed that the killer tried to strangle her, but she'd put up such a fight, judging by her bruised knuckles and torn nails, that he'd resorted to a knife instead. You might think that Brenda was not a Freeway Phantom victim, if it weren't for the green fibers and the note that was stuffed in her coat pocket. It read, "It is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me, if you can. Freeway Phantom." This note was proven to be written by Brenda herself, so the killer had made her write it. For the next year, the girls of D.C. were terrified. 3 of the victims had a first or middle name Denise, while 2 others were called Brenda. People were convinced that anyone by these names were in danger. Brenda and Denise were incredibly popular names in the 60s and 70s, so I'm not sold on that. But the police were even more convinced when the next and final victim's name was Diane Denise Williams. The 17-year-old disappeared in September of 1972, a whole year after the last victim was found. She'd gone out to visit her boyfriend one evening. She'd arrived at the boyfriend's house, but never made it home. She was discovered only 2 hours later, fully clothed, no shoes, green fibers, and strangled. Diane was not sexually assaulted, and the semen sample on her body most likely belonged to her boyfriend that she visited before going missing. Most of the bodies had viable semen samples. All of them had the same green fibers, and all but one were not wearing any shoes. Robert Askins, a serial rapist in the area, and a gang that abducted and assaulted women have all been questioned on the Freeway Phantom murders, but none of them had the same MO. The vehicles didn't match, and neither had any DNA been linked to any of them, or possibly DNA was never run in later years when the technology finally caught up. The amount of blunders that investigators made starting at the crime scenes is astoundingly high. Sadly, this series of murders is not solved simply due to the fact that these girls were not important enough for police to bother spending much time on it. They came from predominantly black neighborhoods where crime was high, and it's hard to argue with the community's belief that they were forgotten about simply because they were a minority group. The Freeway Phantom did not strike DC again as far as we know. Now let's jump from vintage to modern. This particular cluster on the East Coast saw 12 bodies found in the same space of just 2 months, and police refuse to admit that there's a serial killer at work. Can you believe that? 12 bodies in just 8 weeks. In early March of this year, 2025, a hunter from Plymouth, Massachusetts found a human skull in the woods. Ironically, the second victim was found that very same day. 35-year-old Paige Fannin was found dead in the Norwalk River over in Connecticut, after being reported missing for only a day. That's about 150 miles away from each other. A few days later, on the 19th, another woman was found stuffed inside a suitcase and left at a cemetery in Groton, Connecticut, smack in the middle of the first 2 bodies' locations. She'd been inside the suitcase for several weeks, so decomposition has made it impossible to find any outward injuries. All we know is that she was between 40 and 60 years old. On the 20th, just a day later, they find another woman in a wooded area outside New Haven, 33 miles away from where Paige was found. She was identified as Denise Leary, a 59-year-old that was reported missing 6 months prior. Victim number 5 came on March the 26th in Foster, Rhode Island, 150 or so miles from the Norwalk River. Michelle Romano had been dumped on Route 14 in a vacant lot that was pretty overgrown. The 56-year-old had been missing for almost 10 months, and although there's no official cause of death, investigators have been clear that her death is suspicious. And then came April. Strap in. April unearthed even more remains. On the 9th, another unidentified set of remains was found near the train tracks, also in the woods, in Killingly, Connecticut, just 7 miles away from where Michelle Romano was found. There has been no confirmation on gender, age, or what the circumstances of this person's death was. The next day, in Framingham, Massachusetts, firefighters battling a brush fire stumbled on more remains. All we know is that it's the body of a person who's been there for several months. 11 days later, on the 20th, the body of a woman was found floating in the Seahonk River over in Rhode Island. On the 22nd, Megan Meredith was located in Springfield, Massachusetts, on the side of a bike trail. The 45-year-old was still alive, but barely so. She died shortly after paramedics arrived at the scene. All we know is that Megan's death was ruled as a homicide. 3 days after this, on the 25th of April, a 52-year-old homeless man named Samuel Stoville was discovered floating in the Mill River in Taunton. 2 days later after this, at Ferry Park in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, 72-year-old Mary Colasanto was found floating in the river. She'd been missing for a month. On June the 1st, Adriana Suazo, age 21, was found deceased in a wooded area near 143 Central Avenue in Milton. The police have classified her only as an unattended death, whatever the hell that's even supposed to mean. But when you follow their line of questioning, it's looking like they're handling this as a homicide after all. Social media boards and chat rooms have begun discussing the potential New England serial killer. If you've kept count, that's 12 bodies in 8 weeks. Almost all of them were women of various races and backgrounds, most of them above the age of 35. Almost all were dumped in bodies of water or in wooded areas, and all were found within an hour's drive from each other. Adriana Suazo, the 21-year-old, and Samuel Stoville were the only outliers of the 12 so far. The 2 unidentified victims were not given gender, age, or cause of death, can't be put into the same profile until we know more. But that still leaves 8 victims that fit the profile. Are the police really going to stand back and say there's no serial killer who targeted 8 middle-aged women, possibly 10 that were found dead just 8 weeks apart? And if this is what's been found now, how many more are out there in those woods? The oldest set of remains were a year old. What about the years before that and the ones we haven't found yet? I agree with the internet sleuths. Something stinks in New England, and the person responsible definitely travels in that surrounding area, putting them on the highway murders list. And trust me when I say, these two clusters are just the tip of a very large iceberg. Our team's going to cover all of them, but don't worry, we'll space it out between our standalones so that we don't dump it all on you in one go. Now it's your turn. Do you think New England's got a serial killer targeting middle-aged women? Because I sure do. And do you, like me, agree that freeway phantoms victims were utterly neglected simply because they were poor, black, and those neighborhoods were overlooked entirely? To our favorite subscriber, Fifi Honey Blossom, I know you've got thoughts. Which cases do you think should go on our highway series? See you in the next one, people. Cheers.